Hi, it's Maya here, and it's time for my March wrap-up. In March I read 4 novels, 3 comics and 1 short story, and I liked all the novels that I read, so that's great. First I read 2 books by Ursula Vernon, written under the name T. Kingfisher, and the first of those was Bryony and Roses. Now Bryony and Roses is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and it starts when Bryony, who is an avid gardener, is coming back home from picking up rutabaga seeds, and she is struck by an out-of-season snowstorm and has to take refuge in an old abandoned mansion, which soon proves to be magical. As she is leaving, she picks up a rose for her sister, and the beast appears to stop her, and you can guess where this is going. Bryony has to live in the mansion, and she starts to entangle the mysteries of the roses, the house and the beast, and also does some gardening on the way. This is an enjoyable story. I really like Ursula Vernon's writing style. This was a light and quick read, while also including some nice, successfully chilling moments that every fairy tale needs. I liked the main character Bryony. She was a nice mix of no-nonsense pragmatism and capability, while also being very weirded out by the magic of the house. The ending is sadly not the strongest part of the novel, but I'd recommend this for fairy tale lovers who love to garden. Disclaimer, I don't know anything about gardening, but I think Ursula Vernon does. This got 4 stars from me. Then I picked up another Ursula Vernon story, which is The Seventh Bride, and this is an original fairy tale with some elements of Bluebeard in it. Ria is a 15-year-old miller's daughter who is chosen by a mysterious passing nobleman, Lord Creven, to be her wife. And of course, commoners don't really say no to lords, so they are soon engaged. Lord Creven demands that Ria visit his mansion before they are married, and when she gets there, she learns about the lord's previous wives, and the lord sets some magical tasks for her to complete, or he'll marry her. This is also a 4-star book from me. While I think that the plot had perhaps more levels than Bryony and Roses, I still liked Bryony and Roses a little bit better, because I liked Bryony as a character, and I really am fond of the original Beauty and the Beast fairy tale. Also, the resolution to some of Ria's tasks felt a bit random, which of course is definitely a factor in fairy tales as well, so I can't really fault it for that. Again, Vernon's writing style is great, it's charming and light, it's great to read, and it goes by very quickly. The writing style feels strangely comforting even when creepy things are happening, which I think also suits fairy tales very well. And there's absolutely no romance in this book. So if you are a fairy tale loving romance hater, then this book is for you. Romance wouldn't really fit a Bluebeard style fairy tale very well. I also like that the villain is horrible and has suitably creeptastic ways to use his magic. Then I finally finished Memory and Dream by Charles Dellins. I have been reading this book since January, and I really liked it. I just took it in small doses because for some reason I found it really easy to get back into it even when I took pauses. I owned this book for 5 years before reading it because I was very hesitant to pick it up because I either really like or really dislike Dellins' books, and the previous one that I have read I really disliked. I think that was Forests of Memory. But this one I really liked. It drew me in instantly, and I'm glad I picked it up as my bench warmers themed read for January's A Year-a-thon. Now, Memory and Dream tells of Isabel, who is an artist, who at the beginning of this book receives a letter that has been lost in the mail from her friend who died 5 years ago. And this reminds Isabel of things that happened when she was young and studying art in an art school in Newford, and all those things start to catch up with her. The book jumps between the current day of the book, which is the 90s, where Isabel has given up all figurative art, and the 70s, when she is in art school, lives with her friend Kathy, who is now dead, and is taught by the brilliant but abusive artist Vincent Rushkin. Rushkin taught her to paint portraits that are so full of life that they bring spirits from another world through to our world. And we slowly learn what happened in the past, while the plot in the present day also moves forward. I always find the theme of art as magic very fascinating, and this book focuses on the question of how real the spirits are that have come through the paintings. Because Isabel doesn't create them, she just gives them a portal through her paintings to come through into this world. But also the spirits look exactly like the people in Isabel's paintings, and they can't remember anything about where they came from. So Isabel and the spirits themselves have the question how alive the spirits are, and are they as real as regular people. I found this book in general to be tighter and more powerful than its ending was. But Dellins' writing craft is undeniable, and it was a pleasure to read. I really loved following this story. I gave it 4.5 stars. Next I finished the Traitor, Cormorant by Seth Dickinson, and this is the first novel that I've given 5 stars to this year. This is a story of a girl called Cormorant whose country is taken over by an empire, and she is raised in the imperial school where she is taught the manners and morals of the colonial lords. Baru is chosen to become an imperial accountant in the northern country of Ordwun, but all she wants is to gain entry to the ruling halls of the empire, where she wants to change the system that swallowed her home country from within. And I don't even know where to start with this book. I loved it. It felt like it was written for me. It had everything that I like. I love revenge stories, and by that I don't mean the ones where the hero just has to go and beat up some villains who killed their family or something like that. I mean the ones that focus on the question of whether the revenge will consume the person searching for it. I love, for example, The Count of Monte Cristo, the musical Sweeney Todd, and my favorite character from The Song of Ice and Fire is Lady Stoneheart, so I have a big penchant for revenge stories. This book has a lot of political intrigues and tactics, and I think those are done really well. In a lot of books, the political intrigues a bit simple, while in this one it was sufficiently convoluted. And this also had great complex characters. I really liked Baru, the main character, but also her secretary, Muir Law, and Tainhu, one of the duchesses in Ordwun. I also loved that the world had a lot of different people with different skin colors and different cultures. Often in fantasy books there's just this one monoculture, but in this one there are, of course, all the countries that belong in the empire as well as the countries outside of the empire, but there are also these historical cultures, and it's often told in the book what sort of cultures the people in specific countries are descended from. And for example, in Ordwun there are descendants from more than one historical culture, and I really like that. This book is also very dark. It deals with questions of colonialism and human rights. While the women in the empire are given the same opportunities in working life at least, they are still often looked down upon, or at least treated with different standards than the men. The empire also has very strict moral codes against homosexuality in particular, and practices selective breeding. There are lesbian characters in this book and a lesbian romance, but I have to warn that this book is very bleak, to the point that it could almost be called a classical tragedy. But I feel like I still have to state that while it's dark, it's most definitely not in the grimdark genre. I'm not a fan of grimdark. It often feels like it wants to be really dark and edgy, almost to the point of parody. And I find this book, and as well as a lot of books by Robin Hobb, to be more believably dark, where the darkness comes from the actions of the characters, whose personalities are very well built in advance, and you understand why they make the choices that they make, even though you often wouldn't like to understand. These books feel sort of realistic instead of being dark just for the sake of it. I was really emotionally invested in this book, even though I guessed a lot of the plot. In fact, a lot of people talk about this like there's some sort of a twist in it, but I think it was very clearly telegraphed beforehand. But even though I guessed the plot, it didn't take away from my enjoyment. The book also suffered from a slight lull in the second part, but that's pretty much the only bad thing that I can come up with. So Traitor, Cormorant is a dark and complex book with good characterization. I think it's a book that people seem to either love or hate, and I definitely loved it and gave it 5 stars. Well, that was quite a long review, so I'm just going to go quickly through the 3 comics and 1 short story that I read. First I read Hawkeye Volume 5, which is all new Hawkeye by Jeff Lemire and Ramon Perez. This continues Hawkeye's story from Matt Fraction's and David Aja's run, which I really enjoyed. So I was pretty hesitant going into this because I didn't know if I could really like it as much. I did enjoy this. There were 2 different art styles used in this book, and I liked how they differed between the watercolor styles when the story was a flashback to Clint's childhood, and the modern day segments, which sort of were a take on David Aja's style. This story was a good read, although I think there were some weirdly out of character moments, especially at the end. I still liked it and gave it 4 stars, and I will read more, even though I'm not completely sold on the characterization. Then I read Saga Volume 5 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and this is a science fiction comic which continues the story of a couple with a child who are running from various pursuers. I gave this one 2.5 stars, and I'm not sure if I'm going to continue with the series. You can hear me talk more about it in my BookTube SFF Awards a shortlist progress video. And the last comic straight that I read was Descender Volume 1 Teen Stars by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Wen. And this is a science fiction comic about a boy android who is wanted both for the important answers that he might contain and also by some anti-robot people who just want to destroy him. This comic was not really for me, but it was fine. I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. I also talked a bit more about this in the same shortlist progress video in which I covered Saga. And the novella that I read was Vinci by Nnedi Okorafor, and this is a science fiction novella, and it tells of a woman who gets accepted to a university and leaves her own culture to go on a spaceship because the university is on another planet, and on the way there the spaceship is attacked. I enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars, and you can hear more of my thoughts in my Friday Reads video that I'll link below. So those were all the books and graphic novels that I read in March. Some really great novels, some hit and miss comics, and this video almost turned into a full review of the Traitor by Cormorant, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you later.